al primer Foro Internacional de Movilidad. Y a nuestro invitado.
All our and the Adrian Peña, which is a new ministry in this country that has called for contributing to common well-being, but also with which you're working as part of, of a strategic alliance that will help us to make progress in this area. So I'd like not to extend myself. I'm going to say just a few things that you might know about, but that set the framework in which we are conducting this forum of mobility. As we know, Uruguay nowadays has quite some strengths in terms of energy production, which is produced almost entirely 97, 98% of renewable sources, depending on the year. That means that energy in Uruguay does not come from fossil fuels, but wind power, hydroelectrical energy, PV, and so on. From the electrical point of view, we've already made the first changes in this part of electrical transformation, which means that Uruguay is at the forefront in the region. We are talking about the second country in the world of wind power penetration after Denmark. So we are on this path of decarbonizing our mix, and we need to face this problem because 37% of our energy still comes from fossil fuels. And fundamentally, 2/3 of the use of these fossil fuels goes to transportation. Therefore, it is of utmost importance to tackle decarbonization in transportation as a strategic part of this new period and for the years to come. In that regard, we are aiming in two great directions. On the one hand, electric transportation for batteries for short distances and for small fleets, and then green hydrogen transportation for shipments and long distance transportation. There are a number of initiatives in this country in that sense. We have a differential tax that applies to hybrid and electric vehicles. This tax is the same one in the case of fossil fuels. It's 10 times higher, and there are a number of mechanisms to promote investments. Companies can present a project at a commission that runs on investments, and that allows us to finance or provide benefits to those that wish to purchase electric vehicles within certain limits. And in this way, you can get some of those taxes in return. Also, we have been making progress over the last couple of years in trying to develop chargers, infrastructure along different routes in the country. And our utility company, UTE, is committed to installing 152 additional chargers really soon, which will happen in public places and that will work as an incentive to try to promote the use of electric battery-run vehicles. We also have interinstitutional policies to promote the transformation of public fleets, and in this sense, we have supported the transformation of our public transportation fleet by incorporating new electric units last year, and we will keep on doing so in the next couple of months. Also, we have electrical taxis. So to give you an overview of a couple of things that we have already implemented in this period and that will keep developing soon, we have recently been selected by the United Nations organizations for what is called the SDG Fund, the fund that helps countries to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a $10 million fund, which aims to leverage banking funding for the private and public-private sectors in trying to decarbonize their mixes and trying to reach more environmental sustainability as well as develop a circular economy. And this fund is going to be used, among other things, to leverage transformation projects in mobility so that we can talk about sustainable mobility in the future. It's an innovative tool that means that this transformation risk is mitigated by these funds, which come from the United Nations, in order to, as I said, give funding to new projects. I can also say that we're going to make some progress in a more comprehensive way in electrical mobility, in things, for example, such as installing the chargers to help these fleets run in the best way possible, even for smaller vehicles or electric motorcycles, and other measures that we will keep on developing in the next couple of months. This is just, as I said, to give you an overview of the approach by this ministry in terms of electrical mobility. And as I said, well, the ministry is coordinating all of this with the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Transportation and Environment as well. So without further ado, and thank you all for being here, I will give the microphone back to Gabriela. Thank you, Minister. Now we will give the microphone over to the Minister of Environment, Adrián Peña from Uruguay. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Buenos días, señor ministro, ¿nos escucha?
Buenos días.
Good morning. Can you hear us? Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm having some tech issues. I'd like to nevertheless send my regards to the Ministry of Energy of Uruguay, Omar Paganini, also the Secretary Executive of OLADE, and also Christopher Zegres, our academic member today from MIT. It's a pleasure for me to be here. So thank you very much for the invitation, especially to the National Energy Director Official Cantero. These are very special times worldwide where, as you know, this kind of event is also interesting, so that this world health crisis that is posing some economic difficulties allow us to rethink and think about actions and policies that can contribute to sustainable development. Whether you're talking about it from a social or an economic perspective. And of course, from our point of view, sustainable development from an environmental point of view, in a very comprehensive, in the most comprehensive sense of the word. As I said, Uruguay has been making some progress in this regard over the last couple of years. We're a country that long time ago has begun to work in environmental policies. We have a new institution from an environmental point of view. This government decided to really commit themselves to figuring out environmental issues. And so the Ministry of Environment was created for environmental decision-making, but also it's something that has happened over the last couple of years. We have new regulations, and back in 2016, we worked on the national policy to tackle the climate change goals. And so in that way, we're ratifying the Agreement of Paris. In that document, there are a number of actions that are set out to be carried out by 2025 related to the transportation sector, and some of them in particular about electrical mobility. They aim to mitigate carbon emissions by 2025, as I was saying, and the foundation of this is compared to 1990. In the next couple of years, we will also have new goals for 2030, in which we will have to increase the measures compared to the first instance. Also, Uruguay is thinking about its long-term climatic strategy, thinking about the year 2020, and the goal that we have for that is to be carbon neutral as a country. And to do so, we believe that is paramount not only to have specific actions about electrical mobility and sustainable mobility, but also to foster a good policy environment that is consistent with what we've done in the last couple of years. Hopefully, this will stay the same in the long term. So the Ministry of Environment, as Mr. Paganini was saying, has been working very closely with the Ministry of Industry, Energy and Mining in trying to develop the national adaptability plan of the energy sector. As the minister was also saying, from a climatic point of view, it is important to decarbonize transportation, considering that it accounts for more than 60% of Uruguay's carbon emissions, and therefore is a strategic sector on which to work. Electrical mobility, and our countries in particular, as you may know, which has an energy mix that is almost 100% of renewables, well, transportation is a key component for this transformation. Regarding the goals that you can see on the slide on the screen, these are goals that Uruguay has undertaken at an international level, mitigation levels, especially related to transportation. And some of these commitments are conditional, but much of this are unconditional commitments because they are framed within the Paris Agreement. Here are some of the examples of the commitments that Uruguay has undertaken and on which we should keep on developing our measures. As you know, and as part of this framework to meet these goals, we've been working in an interinstitutional fashion with other ministries, Ministry of Industry, both as part of the MOVES project as well as at in other projects. We're working on a sustainable urban policy, also the technical implementation to subsidize, as the minister was saying, electric buses, that focuses on creating revenue for all policies in the area. We're trying to create a sustainable urban mobility policy that allows us to work closely with local governments in other provinces in Uruguay to work on the issue of electrical mobility and especially sustainable mobility, not only to agree on the regulations, but also to bring this topic onto the table and to raise awareness on the importance and the benefits that this transformation would entail. From an environmental point of view, one of the most worrying issues is related to the appropriate management of batteries and disposal of batteries. So the Ministry of Environment has a management plan for this, which is being modified. As you may know, we're applying an act that defines these residues, this type of residue, as a special category in itself, and there is a management plan at the ministry that will, of course, change some things over the next couple of months. Also, this contemplates the possibility of reusing batteries, so this has also been incorporated in all of the ministry's management plans. Everything that is related to the disposal of waste is something that we are strongly working on at the ministry, and one of the main lines, because that is what is set out by the Waste Management Act, is precisely how to deal with batteries. Regarding emissions, we have a decree or a project that has been practically approved that involved the Ministry of Public Health, the Ministry of Industry and Energy, and also the Ministry of Transportation, together with ANCAP, which is the energy company of Uruguay, and of course the Ministry of Environment. We're working on a proposal that is about to be sanctioned by the executive branch. This dates back to the year 2000 with an article that had not been implemented yet, and its implementation is close to happen, which forbids the import of vehicles to a country that does not have at least Euro 5 technology, which hopefully will allow us to cut down polluting emissions of gases like CO2. And even though we've seen an important transformation in our fleet, especially because of new technologies and availability of new technologies, there are still some obsolete engines coming into the country, which is something that needs to be regulated, and that is why this decree will be critical. But Uruguay is in a privileged situation, at least in the region, because we've had for a long time fuels that are low in sulfur, which means that we can easily adapt to these new technologies. So that's the path that we need to go down. So we aim to cut down emissions, as I said, and for that we're going to work together with the Ministry of Industry and other stakeholders. So we believe it's having this kind of event is important because we are working as partners with the Ministry of Industry. We're seeing that in the mid and long term, and I believe that it's a path that we need to go down so that we can really meet the goals that we've agreed, especially thinking about that aspiration that we have by 2030 and especially 2050, as I said. I think, as I said, that this kind of event really helps us because the intention of this government is to really put environmental issues in the spotlight when it comes to making public policy decisions. So the creation of this ministry will only make sense, or does only make sense, if we can really take that environmental perspective when it comes to decision making and public policies. And these events are actually proof that this is something that's happening. Rubén Darío said many years ago that he was really sad because nature was speaking, but people were not listening. And I believe that now people are listening to nature, and we are taking measures to have a better future for ourselves. Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister of Environment, Mr. Adrián Peña. We'd also like to welcome all the audience that is joining us on this Zoom session, the President of ANCAP, Alejandro Stepanik, and the President of UTE, Silvia Mari. Welcome. We also have the Subsecretary of the Ministry of Industry, Walter Berg. So let you all be welcome. Now we will have the Executive Secretary of the Latin American Organization of Energy, Alfonso Blanco. Thank you, Alfonso. Good morning, everyone. Minister of Energy, Industry and Mining, Omar Paganini, Minister of Environment, Adrián Peña, also Fichera Cantero, Director of Energy. Special greetings to Christopher Zegras, who's joining us here today. From OLADE, I'd like to thank you all and thank the Uruguayan government for showing interest in integrating all the stakeholders in this event and for letting us to contribute from OLADE with our skills and our knowledge to try to help in the implementation of these new policies conducted in our countries in the region. I believe it's also important to congratulate Uruguay on its context because of the integration of energy policies as part of environmental policies. There is a clear sign that environmental issues play a key role in the country. That was evident the moment Ministry of Environment was created, which precisely deals with environmental issues in the country. And we should also celebrate our capacity to develop state policies both at an energy level as well as an environmental level. And the fact that we can bring these two portfolios together in a collaborative fashion that is absolutely aligned between the parties. In the region, why am I saying that this is something to celebrate? Because it's not something that you can see every day in the Latin American and Caribbean countries. It's something that every single country in Latin America and the Caribbean should be looking forward to. And it's part of our role at Olade to try to promote this kind of practice from a development perspective, from public policies perspective, so that we can integrate different portfolios and have this long-term view with a country development model. So that's something that it's worth highlighting. Also, I'd like to get down to the main issue that summons us here today, which is mobility and how to approach one of the sectors that has the greatest amount of greenhouse gases in all of Latin America and the Caribbean. To give you just an overview and some figures, the transportation sector in Latin America and the Caribbean accounts for 38% of the total energy consumption. And that varies depending on the country, but it's a trend that remains quite the same in almost every country in the region, which is, of course, an issue that we should tackle immediately. As the Minister of Environment was saying, there is something that is related to this aspect, which is the efficiency of this sector in terms of energy resources. It's something that we really need to work on, not only from the point of view of decarbonizing mobility, but also energy efficiency. And that is something that through policies that aim at electrical mobility, that aim at replacing energy sources in heavy transportation, policies that aim at improving energy efficiency in trying to use more public transport, making it more efficient. These are all important tools that go in keeping with a single goal, which is to decarbonize one of the sectors that, as I said, is responsible for a large part of greenhouse emissions in our region. I also would like to celebrate the possibilities that we have at the region to acquire knowledge on these issues. We need to have a number of events and to give possibilities for us to incorporate knowledge and experiences that have proved successful internationally in terms of electrical mobility. And that is why the contribution and the insights that we will get after Professor Zegris's speech will probably be triggers that will definitely drive change, not only in Europe, but also in all of the region, because we have a number of experts from different countries in the region that are really interested in this issue. So thank you again for having the opportunity of being here with everyone. Thanks for Uruguay's interest in working in a very collaborative way with Olade. We've been working together with the ministries and with Mr. Fitzgerald Quintero on a number of issues that we are absolutely certain are the best way of making a positive impact on the region. Finally, thank you for giving us the possibility to contribute from our perspective in terms of logistics so that we can organize this kind of events. So my most sincere welcome and greetings to everyone in Uruguay. I am here in Ecuador and I'm really, really looking forward to coming back to my country, of course, as many people. So hopefully I will be able to do that soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Fitzgerald. Thank you, Minister Peña. from here, from Ecuador and from Olare. Have a good day. Thank you, Executive Secretary of Olare, Alfonso Blanco. Now we will have Christopher Zegras. Christopher is a professor at transportation and urban planning at the Department of Urban Planning at MIT. He teaches integrated planning, the use of soils, and transportation. He has also done research on urban planning in Beijing, Boston, Cartagena and Guadalajara, City of Mexico, and Santiago. He is the lead researcher of the Culture Urban Mobility Group. So, Christopher Zegras, the floor is yours. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'm going to take a second to share my screen. I hope it works. Can you hear me well? Yes, loud and clear. Can you see my slides? Hopefully. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for the invitation today. It's an honor to be part of this forum. I'd like to thank you all for bringing us together and organizing such an important forum at an international scale, and also to thank all Uruguayans for taking this issue so seriously, because it's our job and our duty as inhabitants of this planet. I would like to especially thank Adrián Peña, Minister of Environment, and Minister of Industry, Energy and Mining, Omar Paganini, and also Alfonso Blanco, the Executive Secretary at Olare. I'd also like to thank Martín Piñero, who is working with a special program at our university in our department. It's a program for urban and regional studies. Martín introduced me to the possibility of being part of this event, so for that I'm very grateful. I'd like to emphasize that I'm by no means an expert in Uruguayan affairs. I've only been there once. I went to Colonia, and that was some 25 years ago or more. So I will share my insights as a foreigner, but with very little knowledge on the local context. Even so, I do sincerely hope that you will find it useful and of interest. Finally, I beg you to be patient with me, because I haven't practiced my Spanish in quite a long time, let alone give a presentation. So I hope that it will be easy to be understood, and if you have any questions, of course, please feel free to ask them. In the invitation letter that I got from Minister Paganini, I was asked to focus on some of these points. So new technologies and associated ways related to mobility, strategic planning of mobility, attending to the urgent need to decarbonize the economy, and human behavior in machines. I will try to touch on these 3 points in the best possible way, but before that, I need to discuss a framework that will, in a way, be important for my presentation. If we think about greenhouse gases, I will try to use the acronym in Spanish, and all the possibilities to decarbonize, and I will have to say that that's a tough word for me to say in Spanish, decarbonization. I will use the framework of reference of great Dr. Schindler. He lives through his contributions today, though he's no longer here with us. So to give you an idea of this framework, I will use the example of mobility of persons, even though it applies analogously to goods and therefore shipment. It can be also applied to other impacts of mobility, such as, for example, noise or even road safety. But transportation emissions begin with our activities, which make up the foundations that result in the emissions of the sector. So for that, many times, in order to do something, we need to travel, to commute. Well, nowadays we have a digital way of being elsewhere, as this conference, but there are a number of factors that play a key role in this demand. For example, gender, income, age, the structure of the economy, and the size of every activity that we do. This affects the spatial distribution of activities, and this affects the distances of commuting or traveling. Then it's all about how we do that, how we travel. So we're talking about the mode, the ways, which includes emissions, of course, and this involves human transportation, which means walking, so zero direct emissions. Then you have other factors that play a role. For example, income that affects the time, speed, comfort, and privacy. Then also income will affect the kind of vehicles that you have, or whether or not you have a vehicle. Then infrastructure will also play a role in choosing which mode you choose, which means you choose, for example, you can choose a bike or you can travel by train. And also how attractive one means of transportation is, for example, speed, again, comfort, safety, and so on and so forth. And also the quality of these services can play a key role as well as relative costs. So we can see again that the environment and design, physical design, and roadworks play a key role. In terms of the energy intensity, energy consumption, for example, in this case, we're talking about passengers per kilometer traveled, a number of technological factors play a role. This includes, for example, the type of engine, its technology, state of maintenance, also mobility conditions, for example, traffic congestions. All of that plays a key role. Also, the number of people traveling, the design, and the shapes and the layouts of our cities also play a key role. And finally, we've got the energy source, which of course also has a role because emissions will vary depending on which fuel you're using. If an engine runs on natural gas, it's not going to be the same thing as if you run on petrol. And in the case of electrical mobility, which I believe is extremely important for this forum, emissions will depend on the generation, distribution, and as we've heard, Uruguay has an upper hand in this sense because of the hydroelectrical sources and wind power sources that the country has. This aims at taking into account emissions per life cycle, because carbon emissions and their impact on climate change are regardless of where they are originated. It's not about local pollution when we consider climate change. So we need to take into account all the emissions from extraction to use and the life cycle of each material. These emissions per life cycle are relevant to all types of vehicles, from shoes to trains, and the infrastructure as well. And that can easily be correlated to size and speed, of course. Now, as I said before, I was asked to talk about new technologies and new means of transportation related to mobility. So I'm not going to talk about vehicles, which is not my area of expertise, but I will talk about digital technology and the role it plays. Of course, the picture that you can see on the screen is just a symbol of what we could expect today in terms of how our cities work, both from the side of the demand as well as from the side of the offer. We expect flexibility, we expect customization, we want services on demand, smart services, and also that they are omnipresent. Digital technology can include every component that I mentioned before. And so I will try to show you some examples about that. Digitalization can play a role in mobility. For example, how we drive in traffic, how we can predict in real time, make real-time decisions, and how we can customize and personalize public transportation. We know that these possibilities are being developed at a very fast rate. I've been working with a lab. We collaborate with a lab run by the government of Singapore, and some of the things that I will show you, some pictures that you will see, come from there. These pictures are about some of the technological developments by that lab in Singapore, in which I've been involved. I didn't work particularly with these technologies, but I will use their images because we've been working together and because they show how fast technology has developed. In 7 years, they went from a golf cart that was working at a campus in one of their universities to a service that has vehicles driving in the streets. So you can see that automated vehicles have improved substantially. I'm using the word automated and not autonomous because I believe that the vehicles that we want to have are automated but not autonomous. And maybe if I have some time later on to specify the difference, then I will. Many of you might know about these automation levels, and we're really far away from level 5. It's a long shot. How far? We don't know. But I wouldn't dare make a prediction as to when we will get to full automation, but we're talking we're just beginning to scratch the surface of level 4 and its applications nowadays, for example, in countries like Singapore. If we think about automated vehicles and congestion, which is a typical indicator of mobility, what happens when these vehicles arrive? Well, in theory, we don't know the net effects that they will have, but it's likely that the congestion will increase, or maybe it might decrease. We don't know. It depends. But what happens with overall demand, total demand? Well, in theory, it is going to be much more likely for us to see a net increase in the number of kilometers per vehicle, which might be a problem when we talk about decarbonization, because it means that the more kilometers a vehicle does, the more emissions that it will produce. In other words, thinking about it from this framework of reference, if we have automated vehicles, and to talk about decarbonization, we need to prioritize modal partition, so efficient public services, higher taxes of high rates of occupation, and decarbonizing the energy source. I believe that much of what the Uruguayan government are doing is precisely this. But there's another question. What's going to happen to the activities? So to understand these possibilities and the effects of to understand these possibilities and the effects on services and on fundamental demand, a couple of years ago, also in Singapore, we did some research where we researched on smartphone technology and also and poll taking. So we took some polls for the specific context, and the interest market in this case was just to try to see what the demand was like for automated mobility, and we used what we call that MI. We can think of this as already existing services, such as, for example, Jetty, which is a service that operates nowadays in Mexico. And the polls showed that the AMOD replaces, in a way, traditional public transport demand. Our poll also showed that those that adopted the AMOD are users that don't have access to a car and are usually young people, and that they are planning to invest this additional time in leisure, recreation, doing other things, eating, and that would also have several implications from the point of view of total greenhouse gas emissions, which is something that we should further research. So we're using this information to simulate the system. We're using a model that we called SimMobility, which is a an urban micro simulation tool, which models load and passengers with models that work with rigorous behavior and consistent behavior, and with long-term decisions. For example, vehicle ownership, location of distance between the house and the workplace, and also the choice of everyday activities and also short-term things like traffic. And we've used this model to model the energy efficiency of automated bus fleets, both in Singapore as well as in some cities in the States. In the case of Singapore, simulations showed that automated vehicles, that AMODs, can reduce the number of kilometers traveled per vehicle up to 50% if compared to the AMOD taxi. Again, think about this need to think about automated vehicles as a way of having or improving public transport. And these numbers revealed that for the user, this did not imply a substantial increase in travel time or commuting time, not to the end user at least. So we apply the same modeling system to ecological cities in the States. First, we need to acknowledge, those of you that know our country, we're talking about cities that depend on vehicles, but also have a number of good offers in terms of public transport. So we did some data analysis to identify two types of cities in the States. One which is decentralized, for example, Maryland, and then some more hybrid cities like Boston, where I'm right now. So we simulated in these two scenarios the introduction of AMODs. In simulations, AMOD vehicles are electric. So that needs to be like that. In this case, the new service eats up the more conventional type of public transportation. So total emissions increase in those cities that currently have a larger use of public transport, that use more public transport nowadays. You can see that's the columns on the left, cities like Boston, for example, and the best option in this case is a strong integration of AMOD services with public transport, with traditional public transport. for both types of cities in the US. I hope that you can understand what I mean by this. I tried to cover a lot of things really fast. So, well, it's important to note that previous models did not take into account long-term impact. So we did not have the long-term dimension in our model, which means that we know that transportation is having an impact on commuters and, of course, on urban development, and therefore it's also having an impact on long-term emissions. So what about long-term effects in urban settings, which we have seen to be affected by all these components that contribute to gas emissions? We see that automated vehicles will decrease real cost and perceived cost of travel, and probably it will cannibalize traditional public transport, and therefore will increase urban expansion and will make a greater demand for mobility and therefore emissions. So what should we do? I think this goes back to the main reason or the main goal of urban planning, which is that we need to find an urban way or an urban shape that can help us to achieve the goals that we intend to achieve. In this case, we need to acknowledge that urban planning, urban design is a mobility option. We need to use it strategically. So the cities that we build affect the way in which transportation, demand, and offer take place. So we need to also acknowledge that building transportation infrastructure is building our cities. These are challenging undertakings that are usually expensive, but they're more expensive to backpedal. So the image that you can see here is the new version of an urban road that it's some works that took place in Boston at $15 billion to just change a road that was an elevated road and turn it into a tunnel, turning it into a tunnel. Of course, this meant more than 10 years of road works in the city at the beginning of the century. So that was a lot of work. So this is all about building city. In Latin America, there is evidence that supports this idea, including, for example, the case of Santiago de Chile, which is a country and a city that I know well. I'm sorry, I'm going to have a sip of water. This shows the elasticity of transport emissions per household and considering different dimensions that are relevant, and like income, for example, and also location of households in the city, which accounts for example, the distance between the household and the city center or to a subway station, density, types of soil, the different features of the city, for example, streets and the layout. It also shows in the blue column carbon emissions and local emissions, such as, for example, nitrogen oxide, organic, volatile organic material. So a number of factors. And what this shows is that income is one of the most influential factors that affects CO2 emissions per household. when it comes to well, CO2 in transportation, right? But a set of factors of urban design and location can more than make up for the income factor. So there is a hope, in other words, that yes, we can build a city that will make transportation more efficient and less polluting in gas emissions and carbon emissions. And I want to really emphasize this. We need to change this soon because the country that we are building today is conditioning future emissions. Now, how do you do that? Of course, territorial management and planning requires a cooperation between all the relevant stakeholders and agencies involved. For example, today we have the ministries of that attending this forum. Well, this forum in itself is the clear sign of how important it is to do it now, at least in Uruguay. But it also calls for a collaboration divided in jurisdictions with local governments. I believe that that is the case of Uruguay, but I said also before, I know that I'm well aware of my lack of knowledge on the local context, but well, at least acknowledging that there is a way, which we know is hard. So I would like to discuss a possibility that sometimes I think we don't always pay much attention to, which is the financial system, the financial aspects. To do what I said before, money can really help. Public funds can affect institutional behavior and can encourage the much needed institutional behavior, but also money can affect individual behavior that is also necessary when it comes to important decisions. So to wrap up, I'd like to show you that some of the key elements of the financial investment signals to the user, and as I said, can really induce cooperation between all the relevant stakeholders and agencies, and even result in the creation of new institutions or empowering existing institutions. So to decarbonize the sector and other objectives and goals, such as, for example, logical and sustainable development of infrastructure and its use, I believe that we need to. Sorry, you can't really see the bottom of the slide on the screen. You cannot see the last row.
pregunta es, ¿cuáles serían los impactos positivos o cómo podemos promover que esta tecnología impacte positivamente para que estos sistemas, incluyendo los vehículos autónomos, sean equitativos, eficientes y sostenibles para las personas y para las ciudades? Estás muteado, Chris.
Gracias. Es una pregunta compleja. O sea, empezando con el usuario, evidentemente el hecho de que las predicciones, y quiero enfatizar que son predicciones, o sea, no es un hecho, ¿cierto? Muestra que hay una demanda para tal tipo de servicio, lo cual es evidente. O sea, somos usuarios y queremos la conveniencia y el confort y el servicio por demanda, etc. Entonces, no hay que descartar eso que es el bienestar de la persona, ¿no? Yo diría que como nuestra modelación apunta hacia dos necesidades.
Aims at two main needs.
La simulación directa apunta a dos necesidades, sobre lo cual las autoridades tienen alguna influencia.
And
Primero,
authorities can really affect this. On the one hand, that services need to be electrical.
la tecnología existe y si la
The technology is available,
fuerza es que si van a entrar con esos servicios, que sean
and so if you're implementing your services, let them be electrical. That comes first. Secondly, that they need to try their best to integrate them well to public transport, to the more traditional public transport, to maximize how they complement each other. I believe that technology plays a key role, of course, both in terms of, also in terms of planning, in trying to also work with, for example, tax integrations and service integrations. Something that is a hypothesis, but I don't have the simulation to back it up, is that these services offer a new way of doing things, especially when they are electrical. They change the way in which public transport and the cities that we build interact with each other. To give you an example, a couple of years ago, I visited the Swedish city of Gothenburg, where Volvo has its headquarters, and they operate an electric line that is not automated yet, an electric bus line. And so buses can go into buildings. You get off the bus and you're inside a cafe. And when vehicles are smart and also clean, you're talking about a whole new array of possibilities to build a city. People would rather not live next to a bus stop or a bus line because they are noisy and they pollute. But when that service improves and those downsides are gone, then of course you change the way that people interact with the transport and the design of buildings and cities. I don't know if that answers your question, Martin. Yes, thank you.
Alfonso, que quiera hacer.
Thank you very much. Alfonso, would you like to ask a question?
Y luego sigue Ariel.
Gracias. Profesor Segras, una muy
Thank you,
buena-
Professor. Thank you for your excellent presentation. And thanks for your approach on the issue of transportation from your experience. There was a message towards the end of your presentation that I was really interested in, which is associated to the link between these changes and funding aspects. What really hit home, in my case at least, was that there is a need to determine carbon pricing measures as a mechanism
generar los incentivos necesarios
to
para la modificación a nivel
have the right incentives so that we see changes in transportation. The thing is that sometimes carbon pricing are complex issues in the way that they're implemented as an instrument, let alone if you think of the case of Uruguay, which has prices that are really high in terms of fossil fuels. If you compare it, for example, to the other countries in the region that have subsidies, and that makes it more difficult to make that political decision to apply carbon pricing measures. So considering those restrictions, what could be some of the alternative instruments that you could work on to help us foster measures that apply tax on carbon emissions? What else could be done? What other instruments could be applied to have a similar impact, or that could be at least more feasible in our country, rather than carbon pricing, for example, if already costs are high, as is the case of Uruguay. And of course, Minister Peña, you can also say something about this if you wish to.
Además, me puedes llamar Chris or Christopher, como quieras, pero...
Alfonso, yes, you can call me Chris, Christopher, whatever you want. That's a really good question. Of course, it's really easy to be an academic and say, hey, you should work with carbon pricing. Well, I'm not a political science professor. And needless to say, that requires an extra global effort if you really want to cut down emissions. But I believe at least it's important to acknowledge that it's something that can be done. I would say that any country, in the States, we don't do it well at all. We are not the benchmark on how to give good funding to public transport. Having said that, regardless of where you are, you should start with an ideal framework. Saying that, not saying that that is the most logical system, but saying that it's the best system. And then, okay, you try to see what steps you can take to go in that direction. I believe that, of course, you need to encourage good behavior, while at the same time you're not. I don't want to say penalizing bad behavior, but you are maybe promoting good changes. For example, I believe that technology is already there. We have ERP2 that's going to have GPS, so it's really, really easy for us to implement a way to charge really rationally the use of mobility and vehicles. And that would be huge for this, and something that I believe could be easily sold to the public. I would like to... I believe that would be really interesting to try to do some research with the citizenship to see their availability or the willingness to pay. And this way, try to understand where funds should go and what for. I'm thinking of something that I showed you, the preference of polls. But the poll of preferences for its context-specific stated preferences. So something like that, that shows to the citizenship what are the options, how much they're willing to pay, and for what. I believe that's a good first step to understand not only the possible reaction of people, but also to try to condition these changes, to raise awareness on the importance of changing this to achieve the goals that we need to achieve, which is to decarbonize our societies. So of course, I'm in academia, and as such, I would say that always the answer is do more research. You know, it's another study. I don't work in the most complicated world, which is without doubt the political world. Thank you, Chris. Omar Paganini, Minister, yes, you have the floor. Thank you. I'm really happy with what has been said, but I need to leave right now because I've got a meeting. So I'd like to thank everyone, the organizers. Congratulations on the event. Christopher, you in particular, thank you for your participation. And of course, Olade for all the support. Danielle, Fitz, Martin, all the team. Thank you so much. And also with Minister Adrian, we will keep on working together. See you soon.
Muchas gracias. Continuamos con las consultas.
So let's go back to the questions. I don't know if Minister Peña wants to say something, but I have a question of my own. Dear Christopher, it's a pleasure. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Ariel Alvarez. I coordinate the MOVES project, which is a project that is part of the United Nations project for development implemented at the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Industry and Energy, and also the Ministry of Territorial Planning, that aims precisely at promoting sustainable mobility. We talked about the tech side of things. We talked about urbanism. And I'd like to ask you about this integration of a number of concepts that have been mentioned and that tension that results between trying to densify cities to make them more efficient, and also that wish to go to greener but further away, places that are greener but further away, which means that public transport is less efficient as it has to go longer distances, and that results in traffic congestions. So the question here is, we have a conversion policies for public transport, as we're set to electric transport, also improving public transport services. And the question is, should we focus on the urban aspect of it? How can we integrate the more regional aspects, maybe more robust transportation systems, perhaps a regional train, perhaps trams? How can you bring all these things together, which of course entail much bigger investments? And also maybe a paradigm that I believe is negative. So you have my stance, but you know, letting people to come into town up to a certain area, and then of course limiting penetration into the city center with like a PNR system, let's say. Again, a tough question. This is exactly about the importance of having horizontal cooperation, because we know, for example, in Boston, that the urban blueprint has about 160 different local governments. So that coordination is quite tough because you have jurisdictions and competencies. I'm not very much in favor of dictating where people should live, but I believe that they should pay the relevant cost of where they choose to live. I think that pricing and public finances can really drive new decisions and making localization more efficient. I think that we are at an interesting point here, because it's possible that the flexibility that we are getting from mobility technologies is affecting more traditional technologies. So, for example, Fast buses, for instance, we call it BRT. This is not a global acronym, so I don't know how to say this in Spanish. This plays a key role in developing mass load transportation that could be useful, for example, when it's developed in an appropriate way at very high demand levels with a certain flexibility. And I would even say with small investments, which also has an impact on greenhouse emissions, because as I said, the bigger the investment, the more greenhouse gases that you will have when you're talking about life cycles. So I think that we need to think in a very innovative way in terms of how to use flexibility and how smart new means of transportation are to promote development patterns that will have low carbon emissions. The problem is that this is not new in terms of urban planning. You know, guarding cities of the late 19th century and now this new trends in urban planning, we're still talking about the same model as we did over 150 years ago. So I believe that there is evidence, for example, such as the case of Santiago, that shows that there are sub-centers that result in less transport emissions of greenhouse gases. And so how can we use that knowledge to try to drive development that is consistent for our metropolis? I think that we can use a system of transferable bonds, for example, that will take into account carbon emissions, so that we can all, you know, play in the same conditions, and we can try to promote cooperation that will take us to decarbonization and also will give us a better and more human urban setting. Again, it's quite a tough question. But then context matters, because what might work for Boston might not work for Montevideo in terms of institutional aspects, or even the behavior of users and the behavior of the transportation systems. Maybe the basic principles will apply, might apply, but how you get to that really changes. Thank you very much. Donella, maybe, would you like to ask a question?
Gracias, Christopher. Y en realidad, para resumir y para ayudarte a ti,
Thank you, Chris. Just to, well, to help you with this, is there anything else that you'd like to highlight? You know, taxes are increasing nowadays in Latin America and Uruguay, at least, well, not with, we have more mobility, but that mobility, that new mobility, is not necessarily electric mobility or sustainable. So what would be your recommendations to try to go in this direction, and how you can, for example, bring that together with things like walking or public transport or bike riding without them being contradictory?
Bueno, la política de promoción, sí estamos realmente interesados en...
If we're really interested in prioritizing decarbonization of the sector, we need to start with the least polluting alternatives. So that is the first thing that you need to prioritize, promoting the use of human-run transportation. You're talking about riding a bike or walking. And secondly, you've got digital transportation, what's happening today. So it's teleworking, but that also has an impact. And we've seen that digital interaction also has a carbon footprint that is not as small as you might think. But it's still less than, for example, me traveling to Uruguay to teach a conference. Just doing this here in Cambridge is much more efficient. But if decarbonization is your main goal, you need to think about investments and the way that you build cities. I would say that is one of the most important things. And also combining that with the right price signals that you're sending. For example, taxes from very specific things to general taxes, for example, on vehicles. Also, the prices of public transport and how it is integrated with other complementary alternatives, subsidies to users, or subsidies to transportation, but mainly subsidies to the user, I would say. And again, technology can make us do that very easily and efficiently. Also, taxes on congestion, for example, and other taxes to vehicles, for example, related to their carbon footprint. So maybe again, I'm putting too much emphasis on the fact that money matters, but hey, money matters. I don't know, Antonella, if that answers your question. Which was, well, you asked me a quite ambitious question.
Bueno, ¿cómo seguimos? Yo veo que la audiencia se mantiene en las plataformas. No mucha gente se ha bajado, así que hay interés. No sé si tenemos tiempo para hacer alguna pregunta.
I can see that people are still here with us, so that's amazing. We can see that we have a lot of interest. So, okay, good. Now Gabriela will have the microphone to coordinate anything, or otherwise we'll have some final remarks by the director. Okay, we have one more question from El Salvador.
Ok, tenemos de El Salvador, de parte de Handal.
El Salvador asks, do you share that there will be a transition in the energy source for mobility in the following order? Gas, renewables, and hydrogen as something that is more utopic? Maybe someone from the Ministry of Industry could help us with the answer. Christopher? I saw that Fitzgerald raised his hand, so maybe he wants to. But Christopher, if you want to answer yourself, you can. Yes, I'd say that it's the most likely transition. But I believe it's something that we need to do at a very fast speed if we're really to, make a significant change. I think that we need to electrify fast and soon, and that would really help. And then hydrogen, well, we should see whether or not that happens and that comes in the future. But I believe that there is a lot to be done with electrification, but that requires a change in the system because electricity by itself is not going to be able to supply all the demand if demands increase at the speed and at the rates that we're expecting it to increase. Thank you very much. Anything else that you would like to say, or should we go to the next item on the agenda? Minister Peña is asking for the microphone. Thank you very much. Congratulations, everyone, for what we have done so far. I don't want anyone to leave. I have another meeting here at 11:30, but it's been amazing, really fruitful. And of course, the message is that there is a lot yet to be done, a lot yet to be worked on to try to make people choose electric transportation. And that's a great debt at an institutional level still. So there's a lot to be done. And as Mr. Paganini said, we're working back to back to ensure that at least we're going down that road and in that direction. So thank you, Christopher, very much for all your insights, all your knowledge. It's been a pleasure. Likewise, thank you very much. So to close this event, we will ask Fitzgerald Cantera, which is the Director of Energy of Uruguay, to say a few words. Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you very much. So first, I'll not extend myself. We said that we would finish at 11:30 Uruguayan time. So in 3 minutes, I'd just like to thank all the ministers that have been here with us, Omar Paganini and Adrián Peña. Thank you so much, Professor Christopher Zegers. You've been so clear with your presentation, which has been very interesting for our work. We're deeply thankful. Also, Alfonso Blanco, Executive Director at Olare, thank you for your contributions, but also for all the support from Olare. And I really want to try to thank everyone that has made this possible. I might forget someone, and in that case, I apologize. So Pablo Garcés, first of all, Gabriela Jarin has also been here with us moderating the panel. So thank you very much. Juan Revelo with technical support. Thank you very much. And of course, Martín Piñeiro, who has allowed us to, well, from MIT to have Christopher with us today, which has been so important. And of course, all the mobility, the electrical mobility team at our Direction of Energy in the Ministry of Energy and Industry. So we have Ariel Álvarez, engineer Lucas Narbondo, also Antonella, Natalia Casanova, Guillermo Ferrer, Sebastián Latancio, and also all the administrative support by Ms. Ramirez. So thank you very much. It's a great team to work with. Thanks to all the participants. We've had a lot of questions both here on the chat and also on YouTube. And so we will, of course, we will not have time to answer them all today, but we will collect all your questions to try to answer them in the near future. Last but not least, this is a very important issue to us. It's been a first forum, and we call it a first forum because we believe it's something to be repeated in the near future. We should keep on having these events where we share international experiences, and we try to find ways in which we can make better changes for the world and see what are the latest advancements and not just focus on what's going on in our countries. So thanks to all the authorities, both at a national as well as a local level, local governments, provincial governments, all the authorities in the region that have joined us. I believe that in the region, there is a lot of work to be done because whenever we talk about electrical mobility, Minister Paganini was talking about the infrastructure that we have in the country, and we believe that we need to multiply that and take it to the next level so that we have better infrastructure in our countries. But also we need to do that regionally, and that is also something that concerns us and that we want to work on so that we have charges distributed throughout the region so that we can have the electrical mobility that we want to have. So we need to promote the right conditions so that families and organizations can choose freely on different ways of how to overcome mobility obstacles in the best possible way. And from a public perspective of public organizations, we need to try to make both the coverage network for public transportation as well as each family, that all of that is efficient and that they can all, as users, choose which is the best way that adapts to them in terms of mobility. Here in Uruguay, we have an energy surplus that, together with the fact that it's combined, that it's generated by renewable sources, it means that it's non-polluting. So we are producing electrical energy that is available, and that means a great opportunity to turn this into something real. Every day, we are going faster into electrical mobility at a world scale, and we believe that it's our responsibility and it's our role to get the region ready for those changes and our country ready for those changes. So those of us that have the responsibility as government to find the organizations that we work with and improve them when we finish our term. So us as humanity need to leave our planet better than we found it. And so decarbonization is, with no doubt, one of the most important steps to do so. These are the premises on which we base our work, and we believe that these events and these contributions are of utmost importance for us to keep improving and keep making good changes and good decisions. So I hope to see you soon, hopefully in the second forum of electrical mobility. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, National Director of Energy, Fitzgerald Quintero. And having said that, we are closing this event of electrical mobility, decarbonizing transportation. Thanks again to the audience that has attended the conference, the forum, both on Zoom and those of you that followed us on Olada's YouTube account. Thank you very much and have a good day.